Take me inside the White House very quickly. Let's start there. What do you think? What do you think the advisors are telling Trump at the moment? It's a shift in 24 hours. Yesterday claiming victory. Just a quick insight to the kind of action in the White House on a night like this.
Sure, man. It's great to be with you. You know, the Trump team right now is probably wishing they were the Biden team because it is very difficult for the president to thread a needle here with the remaining 4 or 5 states to get to 270. Joe Biden seems to be a lot closer. So the first thing is they're probably wishing they were in Biden's shoes. They really have to pull it out in Arizona. They have to rev up their legal campaign because the final backstop may be Pennsylvania, and they may be going right to the Supreme Court and trying to get some late arriving votes counted. So if I'm the Trump team, I bet they're telling him it is a long and difficult road to get to 270. Biden's a better position, and you better get the lawyers ready.
Okay, so if we're going to lawyer up, my last guest says we're seeing the genesis of chaos. In the genesis of chaos, Bob, what does that mean for us? You say we're in the worst case scenario. Draw for me a vision of the worst case scenario between now and Supreme Court. Under Bush-Gore, it took until the middle of December. Draw the picture for me.
Well, the worst case scenario is what we have here, an extremely close election. Best case would have been President Trump or Joe Biden would have won decisively. Going into the election, most of the polls showed it was going to be a blue wave. The Dems were going to take the Senate. Joe Biden was going to take the White House. Donald Trump was going to go to Mar-a-Lago. But that has not happened. What we know for sure is it's going to be razor thin, razor close. The country is extremely divided. There's no repudiation of Trump or the Republican Party. The Republican Party did much better in the Congress, House and Senate than anyone really thought. And so it's a divided country. And Manis, we may not know the White House until December if we have to wait for Pennsylvania and litigate all that. And we may not know the Senate until January if we have to wait for 2 runoff elections in the state of Georgia. We may not have to go that long, but we could only be at the very beginning of the uncertainty and the process to determine, unlike 2000, both the White House and the Senate.
Okay, let's do some blue sky rather than blue wave thinking. Blue sky, White House, we didn't get the Senate. Executive order is a hallmark of all presidencies. Take me into the top 3 things that Biden would do globally, because I get a sense he'll go for foreign policy because he's stymied domestically. What are the top 3 things he goes for with executive order at the stroke of a pen, according to the matrix you've designed?
Right. Stroke of the pen. He walks in day one back in Paris Agreement. We left it formally today. We will join it the minute Joe Biden walks back in. He can do that with a stroke of the pen. Secondly, he orders his foreign policy team to get talking with the Iranians about getting back into the JCPOA. And for the oil market and crude traders, that is probably the most important stroke of the pen for next year, because that means Iran is likely to be able to export about 1.8 million barrels a day by the end of next year that it can't today, making OPEC Plus's already difficult challenge even worse. Third thing, I think now Biden has to come in and say, I meant it about no new leasing or permitting on federal lands, not total ban, but on federal lands. That's become symbolic up there with Anwar and so forth. I think to keep his base happy, he can and we will have to do that. That's about 1/4 of U.S. crude production, about 15% of natural gas production, no further permitting and leasing. So that would be my number 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, let's dig into those a little bit. Let's get to Iran. I think everybody's shocked by the speed with which Libya came back. Do you think it will be a protracted return for America first to the JCPOA, the 2015 deal, before you get Iran there? So is 1 year a minimum timeline before I hit 1.8 million, or could it all be expedited much more aggressively?
I doubt it'll happen much further, maybe the third quarter at the fastest. Look, it's going to take time. I've been involved in a presidential transition coming in with President George W. Bush. That'll be a much easier transition than this one will be, if there is one. He's got to pick people. He's got to staff people. He's got to get them in place. Tony Blinken, Jake Sherman, and others will be his top advisors. They know the Iran brief, so they'll head off pretty quickly. They'll have to gingerly approach the Iranians. It could probably take well into second quarter, I think, before real negotiations are underway. And so I think we're expecting a deal in the summer and barrels flowing by the end of the year.
Okay, so 1.8 million from Iran, 1.2 million from Libya. It gives me 3 that weren't on my roster, really, in the middle of this year. Take me through. We got Brent at 38.48, 3 million net new barrels by the middle of next year. What does that do to the market? What does that do to the OPEC Plus alliance?
It exacerbates the downside risk, makes life very difficult for OPEC Plus. Now, we're not banking on Libya holding on at 1.2. That's probably going to be a little bit structurally spiky. 900, 1.1 going down. It'll be a miracle, I think, if Libya can hold 1.2 all through next year. Things have got better, but not that much better. And with Iran, we think it's the end of 2021, not the middle. You'll see those barrels. But nevertheless, it's barrels they don't need in a market that due to lockdowns and Libya, as you said, is already weakening. And so OPEC Plus is going to have to buck itself up and exercise even more discipline and coherence than it has so far. That's why you're starting to see the rumors already. I think it's pretty likely they will decide to postpone the tapering of the cuts, keep them at 7.7 in January, don't lower them to 5.7 here, and we'll probably get that decision at the ministerial on November 30th. So I think they see the danger, and they will have to, unfortunately for them, continue the cuts a little longer, and then hope for a vaccine.
What does that do to price? You're always good with price. You called it way down at $3 before we tanked it into negative. So give me your pricing on that scenario, which is OPEC holds. I don't know whether that gets us ouching like hell, but OPEC holds, and Iran and Libya spiky crude comes back.
You know, Manus, it's a lot easier. It was easier in March to predict the collapse than it is now to predict stability. But listen, our base case, we get the vaccine next year. Shale oil had a little blip after they brought back some shut-in wells, but now declines are going to take over. Shale is going to go back down towards 8 million barrels a day. And so if those two things happen and we get the demand pickup, we think crude Brent will hold about $45 to $50 by the end of the year. We think you'll start to see more stock draws, about 3 million barrel a day rate in the fourth quarter, another 3 million barrel a day in the first quarter. It'll go down a little bit, but we started to see big stock draws already. And our base case is we'll see the market clean up despite Iran coming back because shale will be so weak and you'll get that vaccine. However, I always ask myself, where am I wrong? Because about the only thing we know about anybody's forecasts, and we learned the other night, polling forecasts do, is they're wrong. And where are they wrong? And if I'm wrong, it's lower. We think the risk is skewed in a pronounced way downward for price on COVID, on Libya staying longer, Iran coming back sooner, and cheating with an OPEC Plus. So the risk here is all the way down. If I had to go to bed at night with a position on, I'd rather be short than long crude.
Taking 25% potential, you talked about the federal land. In other words, Joe Biden making a move on federal land, stopping additional draw there. So that's U.S. supply reducing. That's some kind of a cap on U.S. supply. That's doing for OPEC what it can't really do for itself. So is that not a bid for me in 2021 under a Biden presidency?
Right. So we model, it's not just the ban on federal lands, but also the other regulations he can put in place, methane regulations, requiring offsets for major projects, a financial market, brand new regulations. The president has sweeping power to go to New York and the SEC and go after the banks. So we model, Manus, that within 3 years, a Joe Biden in the White House means there's 1 million barrels a day less U.S. production than there would have been under a Donald Trump because of the return of Iran and the lower pressure that puts on prices, and then the broad array of regulations and policies the president, even with a Republican Senate, can still put in place, and we think he will. This will help as we get to middle of the decade, the market clean up. And I think OPEC Plus is going to be very grateful for the Biden administration in crimping shale oil production growth by the middle of this decade, helping the market get back into a healthier phase and clean up nicely.
Just let's close off and stay with the foreign policy aspect. You say it's no China America with a Biden in the White House and a Republican Senate. Surely with executive order, he can reverse the tariffs, but you say it's not a return to status quo.
With China, no. I think the Biden team feels that Trump was right in going hard on China, but he went too far. And the Biden team really wants to re-engage with China on electric vehicles and the climate change agenda. So we think Biden will remove some of Trump's tariffs. The Biden team did not like the way President Trump used his emergency authorities to put those tariffs in. I think there'll be some, we call it a cold détente, not a Cold War, which is what we would have if President Trump's reelected, but more like a cold détente, a tamping down, a ratcheting back, a seeing if there can be some cooperation on climate change, which is very important to Joe Biden and the Democrats in the House. And on that basis, maybe just keep it at a cold détente. But there's no going back to Chimerica. There's no going back to we're lovey-dovey with China. Those days are over, and I think it's only how bad, really, the relationship is going forward.